Hello, hello, hello. It's good to see you. Welcome back. Oh, didn't even realize. Little accidental product placement. It will not happen again. I apologize. Got a got some dirt on the lens there. I get it. Oh man, it's a little dusty little sucker. I got to get off there. There, we got it. We got it. I apologize. Welcome back. It's good for you to see me. I just got back from a trip to Montana, and it's a very pretty state. And spent some time there, just camping out, doing some photography, getting away from things, getting back in touch with the real me. In the corner here, you can see I put a video up of my this sunrise ahead of a lake. If you're ever into some very much minimalism, check it out. It's just pretty much quiet with a nice sunrise in a northern Montana lake with a lot of peace and serenity. And yeah, and some crimes, but we won't talk about those. Anyway, so I will watching meteor shower here. It was very, very cool. The height of the Perseids meteor shower. I'm putting together some video and stuff, but even just watching it and stuff and just being there was really freaking cool. We had this one meteor. I was laying near a fireplace or near a fire pit, but watching it with some friends, and we're just watching, we're straight up watching them overhead, and we saw one that, like, it just boom, and then it kind of just died out right over our heads, but it was so huge, and so it must have just been, I don't know, it was so close, so whatever, that we could watch it dissolve into like glowing embers. You could just like, you could literally like, I swear you could almost like see the individual embers of this thing breaking up, and then it just kind of like dissolved in. We watched it for like 20 seconds. We could see this thing dissolving in front of us, just this fire breaking up for like 20 seconds. We could see the embers and the smoke. It was fantastic. So anyway, video of the following morning, which was fantastic as well. And I put up it's on my channel if you care to see that. But that's not what you're here for. And I know a lot of you are saying right now, "Hey Dan, how could you possibly, with the importance of what you're doing here, how could you possibly, be a responsible genius that I like to think I am, and still do things like this, spend time on stuff like this?" I get it. I totally get where you're coming from. And I do feel a little bit guilty when I'm not directly saving the world. I'll just put it this way. Sometimes I've got to quiet the beast. I've got to quiet the beast. And I need to go to places and recharge, because even though when I'm operating, I am perfection, there's nothing wrong with any part of me, I still kind of have a battery. And sometimes that battery needs to get recharged. So I do what I do in the service of greatness. Well, with that in mind, let's continue our answers to the last questions. I think I'm 113 for 113, but I've got to double check the. It might be 115 for 115. It's somewhere in there. Batting 1,000. So let's find our next question. And our next question is, am I able to navigate a browser? Well, I am. And there we go. Look at that. It's magic. Our next question, our next last question, and if you need a refresher on this whole series, I'm answering all of the last questions from a field of very eminent physicists and philosophers and poets and painters and, biologists and botanists and behavioralists and interesting minds from all over the frickin' spectrum that got coagulated and conjugated and differentiated on an edge.org question, which was, the question is, what is the last question? And so, 273, I think, brilliant minds answered that question. So I thought, why don't I just answer those questions? So there's your refresher. If you want anything longer, I've got an actual intro, which is much more professional and much faker as well. So anyway, our last question comes from Abigail Marsh, who is Associate Professor of Psychology at Georgetown University. And let me tell you something, the bread there, fan-frickin-tastic. Her last question is, when in the evolution of animal life did the capacity to experience love for another being first emerge? 12. On that tree of life thing with the humans going up, whatever, the second dude. Boy, well, okay, so what are you going to call love? I think this question is, obviously you have to define love. So, and I think love is something that can, there's kind of like, what is it? Eros love and agape love. There's more of a lust thing, but a love thing is more of a concern in a total well-being for that individual, as opposed to, in addition to, physical attraction and stuff like that. You want to be with that person. You want to get to know more of the person. You want to devote yourself to the relationship with that person, among other things. Anyway, what are we going to call love? How do we define that? I guess what I was saying was that, yeah, you can split it up into like two things, but I think it's more of a, it's more of a continuum than it is kind of like a love and not love. I think the extent that which you could love someone is kind of the extent that you can also be aware of them and know them.
We're on day 3 of the convention. The question is, how's it going so far? Well, former Democratic
we're gonna list a little
closely. She describes the experience as, quote, like binge watching a Marriott commercial. That's about right. Pretty unappetizing. Platitudes.
He is technically my intellectual hero. How do you define love? Okay, so I'm going to define it enough to say it's got to be past just the kind of erotic kind of physical attraction. Boom. How are we going to define? So then, where do we get? It's so dependent on how you define it. I will say this from a one way to understand this in a non-philosophical but more scientific and clinical way would be to get to understand the differences between other animal species that pair bond or mate for the same mate throughout their lives, or at least throughout a significant portion of their lives, understand how their brains work, hormonal levels with them, without them. I know this is dry and not, this is Keats, but to understand it from that level, yeah, you would want to, and I think there's a fair amount of maybe like birds and stuff that some of them pair bond and some of them don't, and like they might be very similar in other ways. So you could kind of actually tear that, investigate deeply into kind of like to get at kind of a chemical level and a whatever level, because that still has to feed into what we're calling love. I think. I mean, I think you should be able to find some differences that could be explained in the look at dopamine levels. I don't know. All I'm saying is there's a fruitful area of exploration in determining like how two species, one is pair bonding and one is not, but otherwise are very similar. Learn about their patterns, their behaviors, study their freaking neuronal, levels and stuff like that. So there's one. So I've already answered the question completely, fully, and correctly. So now I can just riff. Okay. Love, if I'm gonna take a stab at, I'm not gonna define it discreetly, but I'm going to use I'm going to differentiate types of love just to say that the love that we're talking about here is, you are very concerned about your others' well-being when you're not around them. I'm not trying to make a complete definition, but just enough of a one to use as a tool. Because that may be too I'm wondering if that's actually too far ahead, like, because, well, what the hell is love? Dude, I mean, what is it, penguins or whatever, when they pair mate and they're for years and years and they keep going back, it's like, is that substantially different than human love? I would like to say yeah, but are we just, are we just putting language onto basically the same things that elephants and whatever? And we throw language on top of it and give it a little romance. I would like to say, this brings me back to what I was saying first, is that it is somewhat a degree because of the ability to be aware of more things. it would be related to your ability to have memory as well, because part of the reason you love someone, you grow attached to them, whatever, is you remember from other experiences, and you can draw on all those other experiences that were wonderful with the person, so that you can. So it would be impacted by how your memory works and what's short term versus, like, so any, so it'd be impacted by so many things. So, thought there might be another answer at the bottom of that. Man, it's like, to understand that, you have to know when did, like, you might have to know when did, like, theory of mind develop. Inside. Um, hmm. Well, obviously, from an evolutionary perspective, there's something in pair bonding that's probably an important key in that. I'm rather repeating myself, but the words are delicious. Um, if I were to put a ballpark guess on it, well, let's use another little trick here, or tool. Okay. Chimpanzees and other primates know how to lie, know basic concepts of unfairness, can certainly communicate in some ways. If you know, if you can conceptualize fair and unfair, is that a prerequisite for love, or could love come before the conscious ability, or the ability to recognize that? I'm going to say you can't have love without some ability to recognize fair and unfair, because part of love, at least long-lasting love, is the feeling that you weren't screwed over, and the feeling of that multiplied and multiplied, and then you get screwed over, and you get the square root of wherever you were at, pretty much. So you would have had to have that feeling of, okay, fairness and unfairness. We've seen that in some of the higher mammals, but especially like chimpanzees and stuff like that, dolphins. I'm going to say and you see am I right that you see some species of like the great apes and the monkeys that pair bond for long term and then don't, and some that don't? I want to say that's right, or at least semi. I don't want to say monogamous, but somewhat monogamous in the structure of the great apes. If that's right, then you have to kind of say somewhere in there. Are there any of the great apes that look at it right there? There's you may see how much pair bonding are you seeing in the great apes and the other, dolphins. And is there a relationship of just like animals below a certain brain mass to body size ratio don't pair bond? Or, is there any relationship there that you have to have a certain amount of neuronal matter to even get that thing going? I'm thinking that there has to be. Although I could be wrong about that. It could also be just landscape, nearest neighbor thing. Maybe things don't move and so you pair bond just because it's, or you the next door neighbor is always the right call. That might have some effect on it. So because of that, I'm going to say somewhere between, and if you're going as humans, just in the last thing, and I'll go back on the tree, somewhere between 8 and 2 million years ago. So error bars are fairly large, but hey, so is the ways that you can define love. My error bars are as given as wide a latitude as the ways you could define love. So it's, and if I'm a statistician, and it's actually 5 million years ago, boom, I nailed it. That's like the old joke. It's like, I'll change it up and I'll make it close enough. It's like 3 statisticians go to bowl, and one guy bowls his first ball and gets a gutter on the left-hand side, and the second guy gets up to bowl and he bowls a gutter on the right-hand side, and the third guy goes, strike! Statisticians. Fuck them. Anyway, so that's your answer, Abigail Marsh. And thank you for the interesting question. I hope you are experiencing love in all its myriad ways. All right, let's find the next question here. And that is... Oops, let's see if that's there. Barnaby Marsh, who is the evolutionary dynamics scholar. Evolutionary dynamics. That's a lot of math, but a lot of cool math, I would think. Program in evolutionary dynamics at Harvard University, and visiting study. Okay. Evolutionary Dynamics Scholar, Program in Evolutionary Dynamics at Harvard University, and visitor for Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. Oh. There's nobody there. I mean, Einstein, but whatever. Not now, hopefully. No, that's a decent place. Be nice to walk around that place at some point. Be kind of cool. Soak in the vibes. Barnaby Marsh's last question is, how much of what we call reality is ultimately grounded and instantiated in convincing communication and storytelling. I'm going to have to read this question again. How much of what we call reality is ultimately grounded and instantiated in convincing communication and storytelling? Whee! Wow, this is how much of postmodernism is true? That's basically the another way to answer this question, or at least as I understand aspects of postmodernism. Let's answer the question he's actually asking. I think, well, it's the answer, just to get it out of the way, is 13%. I'm not going to do the math, because once you have the answer, I mean, you should be able to. It's a pretty simple effort to just, do the math that gets you to 13%. So I'll trust you to that. More and more is the other answer. And I'm talking about AI, not really AI as much as just living virtually, and the fact that communication is becoming, or at least, I don't know how much I don't know if communication is sugar or NutraSweet, but I'm just saying communication, information flow, network effects, all of this stuff, because of the internet and satellite communications and shit going faster and faster. All of that is making, and all of that is pretty much more malleable, changeable, whatever the nature is, at least on a short term, of course. That is becoming more and more of our makeup of reality. Even after saying that, I'm going to say, yes, there is a fair amount of it, but most of our reality, I'll put it this way, our reality is, for the most part, the delusions that we need, and the illusions that we need to make effective progenitors. Whatever made us effective to live our ancestors to live this long and go is sorry, excuse me one second. What happened there? What happened? Why did I lose? Hey, you're going to be with me through hey, look at that. I'm an old pro at this. Back to life, back to reality. I don't know where I was, but it's getting more and more a part of us. The artificial worlds are more dynamic, customizable, whatever the nature is. It's a seduction that's probably not good for us. Uh, but will allow some kind of freedoms that we are, when we're less bound by nature, it's going to open up some minds to do some, interesting, crazy, freeing, poetic stuff. But we gotta manage it as a species, not as a government or as a whatever. We just have to kind of figure it out. Anyway, I still want to say that at least most of the way that we think, the stories that we construct, the narratives that we construct, it is still bound, and for good reason, to kind of evolutionary laws and economic laws, which are kind of co-entwined with evolutionary laws. When you get low enough, they just becomes like economics. Evolution does, in my way of thinking. But anyway, so. And that is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. That's just a thing. And I think part of what we're going to see in the digital takeover of the universe, of our universe, which is kind of happening, is, I was saying, it's going to be freeing. It will be freeing because it'll create a lot of opportunity for people to just express themselves in different ways, and even like separate from gender if you want to, or do stuff like that. Although anyway, it will allow us to be much more free. But free is not always. I mean, there are levels of freedom that are good, and then there are levels of freedom that even though we want total freedom, if we get total freedom, it's like, ooh, people, the species isn't built too well for total freedom. You need some constraints, because the art is working well in the constraints, and I think even for a species like humans, we need some kind of constraints to actually make something work. So it's kind of a not dystopian, not utopian, but whatever that we're heading into. Anyway, did I say 13%? Because it's 13%. I also want to say that the fact that, even, at least as the way I see it, different cultures have different stories that they tell, different languages. A lot of, you look at humanity and had a lot of separation, variation, and just opportunities to differentiate. But there are a lot of things that cultures that I believe that we just had in common. So it wasn't and part of that was probably humans never were all that separated for all that long a time, but still, I think there is so much that is in common in the types of stories that we tell, as kind of like very grand meta-narrative type stuff. Even a lot of religions, you'll find a lot of commonalities in religion. So that makes me want to say that even if it is, the fact that there's a lot of commonality there tells me that that there's something that has to be true about storytelling that is deeper than the stories themselves. Like they're really just kind of like behavioral programs that operate, but a lot of the behavioral programs are common among different cultures, and so I don't think we can't ever get at reality. Honestly, I don't think. I mean, theoretically, we can never get to reality because all we have are these interfaces. We have sight and smell and touch and other instruments, but every instrument we devise is just a different way of viewing that instruments or that senses interface with reality. There is, at best, interface with reality. At worst, we could be even more diffuse than that. But so we can't ever really touch reality. We can only interrogate it. But because a lot of our project plans, once something in us has interrogated reality, it becomes like, oh, human do this, human do this do human, and there's a lot of commonality there. So I think I think if you were to do something that is like ethically unconscionable and you would never do it to a human, but you tried to raise them with a completely different, even you tried to raise a kid that only understood objects via quantum mechanics, and your communication and storytelling had nothing to do with reality as we understand it. So you would try and just teach them that objects exist that don't, and you would try and, I mean, obviously, of course, this is like you'd never do this, but in our little theory here, in our little playing our mental exercise, if you taught that kid and tried to teach him to just basically the photo negative of reality as we understand it, it couldn't be the photo negative, but you get my point. I think you would potentially end up with a somewhat maybe mentally unstable child, but it would be almost impossible for him to see, he's not going to see red if you call it green. He's not going to feel apathy if he comes across an attractive partner. Like, there are certain base things which are just fundamental to just being a biological creature the way that we are, that try as you might, you couldn't screw up. You may be able to screw up the human, but you wouldn't be able to utterly change their perspective of reality and or not sure that's the question, but their perspective of just, you tell somebody 1,000 times that the couch isn't there, they're still going to see the couch. So the answer, Barnaby Marsh, to your question about E2 modernism is, again, 13%. And it is increasing at a rate that's a little bit scary. But hey, if we're still here in 13 months, we'll find out. Anyway, thank you for that, and on to the next one. The next question is from John C. Mather, who is a Nobel Prize in Physics laureate and senior astrophysicist. That should be a new whatever. Senior astrophysicist, Observational Cosmology Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. And John C. Mathers, I'm going to say it one more time, Nobel Prize in Physics laureate, senior astrophysicist, Observational Cosmology Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. I'm not going to put four words together right, so that's all we get. Apologies, John C. Mather. John's last question is, what is the master principle governing the growth and evolution of complex systems? The first answer that came to my mind is there is no master principle. Well, I mean, this seems like this could be a few different questions here, actually. You're talking about the growth and evolution of complex systems. So, those are potentially two very different questions depending on the type of system, right? Because a network, a computer network, the interwebs, could grow just because it could just discover new nodes and the system goes that way. You've got a router or whatever, and and none of the firmware or whatever would change, but it would just grow because it's just like, it's like search nodes. Oh, new node found, whatever. And it's growing, but can you say it's evolving? Because if you talk evolution, aren't you talking about something that where there is reproduction and change? Or what would Dawkins say? The non-random survival of randomly varying replicators. Now, I don't think this question fits into necessarily randomly varying replicators, because I think you want to talk about maybe like maybe we can even put complex computer systems, stuff like that, if we want to put it. Okay, so we set AI off in the playground and say go do your thing, and we try and evolve the system. That would cover that too. All right, so even if we adopt a fairly generic usage of evolution, and but I'm still saying evolution is as undirected by an outside entity? What is directed? What is controlled? Could you say a model of vehicles evolved? Does that make sense? Is that the right way to think of evolution? Or are you saying evolution needs to be there's a random element to the generation? And you get stuck around that one. But I don't have to get stuck because I already answered that. The question is, there is no master principle. If there would there be a difference in a master principle governing the growth and evolution of complex systems versus a master principle governing the growth and evolution of simple systems? Is there some place that there's a dichotomous, oh, boom, it's a complex system now there's a new principle? Or is it always the same principle through simple, through complex? Or is there no principle in any of it? I mean, when I think principle, I want to rephrase that to mean something that's very mathematical and very basic, like, very like economic sense at a certain level. I mean, a cell, is a cell a complex system? I would think a cell is a very complex system, yet cells aren't really evolving, right? Or at least, like human cells, we don't think of human cells as like evolving. We think of their tasks are laid down, right? But yet, what they're made of, or what they comprise, is evolving. So, I think this is too many questions. And I think the answer to both of them is no. But kind of sounds like, is there a moment in the economics of evolution where where geometry becomes algebra? I don't know what that means. But does the formula change at a certain, what changed in the Cambrian evolution? What I was thinking, like, in the Cambrian evolution, like it's almost like biology discovered a new branch of mathematics. I have no idea. I don't think that's accurate technically. Maybe poetically, though. It's like, and maybe there's systems were somewhat complex well before the Cambrian, depending on how, of course, you define complex. But some of those nematodes and blankety blank really have to define complex. What is complex? How many processing, how many million, thousand, hundred bits of processing do you need to do per second to be a complex system? How many kilobits a second? How many kilobits per second do you need to be able to process in order to be conscious? For me, it's 12. I keep wanting to say that there probably isn't one, or if there is, I don't know how there could be a sharp line that would differentiate complex systems from simple systems. Where is that sharp line located? Well, complexity has to pay for itself, right? The universe is not entropy is what is kind of like the natural state of the universe. Complexity, organized complexity, needs to pay for itself. So the currency of complexity is reversal of entropy. So if the currency of complexity, so we might have to bring what is at the nexus of Claude Shannon and Newton? Complex systems require a lot of energy to keep together, and they require the payload or the whatever of the instructions to put it together. I mean, at every step, something has got to outwork the energy that it's able to take in. It's got to be able to more efficiently ride that energy wave. Is there something about that ability to ride that wave dependent upon what the hell is riding it? I really don't think there is a master principle. Or if there is, it's analogous to just like, if it lives, it works. If it doesn't live, it doesn't work. I mean, any principle, I feel like that could be capable of explaining the growth and evolution of complex systems in general, has to be so simple as something like that. Like, it lives, it dies. If it works, if it creates things that live, it doesn't work if it creates things that don't live. I don't think if you get so general as to say just any complex system, I just don't think you get, certainly the components of those complex systems must add up to being able to do whatever successfully at an advantage, or more than a simpler version of whatever. I guess what I'm saying is a complex system must be able to pay for the simpler version of itself plus the complexity added. So it has to be able to pay for that addition of complexity. But I think that's still so generic that you're talking about a master principle being fundamentally very economic at its base, and fundamentally uninteresting, I think. Yes. So, John C. Mather, the master principle, if it exists, will not be that interesting. And I don't think it exists, but if it is, it's so low level. It's like a logic gate. It's like one logic gate in a CPU or something. It's just like, oh, that doesn't. It's like, oh yeah, that's the framework for it, but so the master principle could be analogous to just a very, very simple series of just logic gates. Do this, yay or not, and you continue up the tree of logic gates or whatever until it gets yay or not, and then the complexity has to pay for itself because it's paying for itself, or it doesn't continue. So, excuse me all, because I don't know, nothing wants to obey me. Obey me, technology. So that is your answer, John C. Mather. It is some type of logic gate, whether or not we're calling it on silicone or whatever or not, if it really exists to be understood at all. That is your question. I'm 114 for 114. I feel blessed. I should have done this years ago. I would have changed the world years ago. I can feel it slowly changing now. Things are getting a lot better. Just in the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, it's August 29, 2020. I started this in like March or April, and I feel how much the world has gotten better since I started this. So it's very exciting. Um, anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment. Thank you for your time. Welcome back after that brief interlude. And we are back with Tim Maudlin. That's a very theatrical last name. Tim Maudlin is a professor of philosophy at NYU, which is not that far from NYME. Tim Maudlin's last question is, why are people so seldom persuaded by clear evidence and rational argument? They're not. Question answered. Well, clear evidence and rational argument are late comers in the evolutionary game, at least as expressed via communication external to oneself. So, part of the answer could just be a not necessarily unhealthy relationship to trusting anything internal to oneself to something external to oneself. How much should we trust communication in and of itself? How much of Claude Shannon is signal and how much is noise, or how much should we treat it as signal and noise? The idea of communication of itself, of taking input externally from another social creature. How much of it is based on one's trust in other agents? Because we shouldn't completely in any social society, wow, it's like you have to have a certain level of kind of agreeing that the signal is much greater than the noise at a social level, at a communicative level, to become a social society. But there is probably, I wonder if there's some type of like, okay, so that's just the baseline. Is something maybe a perfectly clear and cogent argument, but if it's kind of like its requirements are above a certain level of baseline for society of just the degree to what an individual should trust arguments that didn't come, or at least doesn't feel like they come internally, that may play into it. Another aspect is, rational to what the hell is rational? I mean, rational doesn't get you as far as I think most people think it gets you. It's like, what is rational? I mean, we should emphasize human liberty and humans' ability to be free. Rational argument makes sense. What the hell is freedom, and what is freedom for one person isn't freedom for everyone, and freedom. I mean, so you could have very different answers to a rational argument which just says humans should be free. And a lot of people could answer that very different ways because of all the complexity that comes with such even basic things. So then you try and you're already, because humans differ. I mean, we can come to an agreement on 2 plus 2 because that kind of very simple logical things like that make the world even perceivable, understandable in any context. But when you start adding this mountain of things that come up above 2 plus 2 to have what we call a rational argument, there is probably some type of evolutionary algorithm that's also at play in terms of like communication, in terms of just like, because if everybody thinks one way, even though it just apparently seems to be the right logical way, if it's not always right, there will be an advantage for somebody that doesn't believe this at the rare time when it's wrong. So there may just be kind of a built-in healthy, algorithm there that just says nobody should believe, X, Y, and Z all the time, because if somebody's wrong, even from like an evolutionary perspective, everybody believes one thing, but all that thing might just be wrong. Boom, everybody goes down. So it may be just a insurance, some type of cosmic insurance, as another idea. Again, I'm just going to say, okay, well, clear evidence. I'm going to kind of go back to just when you say clear evidence, you're kind of saying, or I'm intuiting that as, look, here's the fingerprints, they match. The odds of the matching fingerprints are so tiny. To be two other people, this guy had to be the burglar because there's his fingerprints. Clear, rational, clear evidence, rational. He couldn't have done this because he's my boy and I love him. There's no way he did this. It's also rational to protect your children, or want to protect your children. So there's different types of rational. And the evolutionary rational may oftentimes interfere with the theoretical rational, or the intellectual rational, or the also the things that we instinctively trust over rational argument, or instinctively just, they've been so, a lot of these things have been so built in prior to being, a lot of our kind of just whatever has been built into us even prior to us being able to contemplate clear evidence and rational argument. So it's already, we've got meat on the bones of thinking a certain way, and then a newcomer to the game says, okay, no, it's And from a certain perspective, you can just view a clear evidence and rational argument as basically just kind of like running evolution 1,000 times and just seeing what the right thing is. But you're kind of saying, okay, the evolution's been run for 1,000,000 generations and it's given me this, but then you're saying this off of this kind of like artificial sense-making apparatus that I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why. There's a lot of reasons why people don't often. Here's what it is at a basic level. People that were seldom persuaded by clear evidence or rational argument must have fucked and had kids. You know, more than the people that were. I mean, there's been, I mean, you can't even. We'll put it this way: you can't even get philosophers to agree very much, or to agree necessarily on their own rational arguments. And these would be the people that you would think would be the kind of the masters of that landscape, and they can't even agree on what they would call necessarily rational arguments. And they're the masters. So I think you're asking in my opinion, you're building too much into what you're even calling a rational argument, because it's also a rational argument has to be, you still have to consider the landscape of that argument. So you have to, the preconditions, the a prioris, all that kind of stuff. If you are trying to convey that argument to someone that just doesn't have that landscape the same, and I know it should be, preposition, but logical, not logical and sound conclusions, and everybody can get behind that. But once you get even remotely complex, a person's landscape of their interrogating what is a clear and clear evidence and rational argument becomes their own. It's no longer a two-dimensional plane. It becomes like a fitness valley of that may not agree with kind of like the fitness landscape or whatever of the person making the argument. So I don't know if that makes any kind of sense, but it's just like it's there are so many. Anyway, I'm going to say that. Man does not survive on logic alone. Also, there's a certain part of just evolution and us being here that isn't rational, or it's just it kind of is what it is. So at a certain like base level, I mean, like it's not rational that humans are even here. So maybe that kind of argues for why should we all converge on universal rationalism, even if you could define such a thing, which we've already said we can't. I mean, you get past 2 + 2 = 4, and people are going to start having problems. Shit, I can make an argument for voting for either of these freaking presidential candidates, and it hurts. That physically hurts me. But I could both understand, hear, and make rational arguments for these whatever. So I think also we're gonna find out that maybe the landscape of what I was talking about, the pre-axioms of the are so dependent upon your information intake. Because once you get past, all men are mortal, Socrates was a man, Socrates is mortal, fair enough, okay. If you don't agree on that, but that's the basic logic gates of whatever the hell it is. Once you get past that, I'm sorry, but clear evidence and rational argument does not get you, doesn't buy you what it thinks it buys you. It just doesn't. Also, we're thinking from a grand scale, like you think of humanity as exploring an intellectual landscape of possibility. And even if we were all kind of like, oh yes, let's just accept rationality and do this, even if rationality was a real thing that we could define and it was like A, B, C, D, and E, there's still other landscapes that could be more advantageous, that are not necessarily on those avenues of rationality and clear-headedness. I mean, I don't know what the relationship to being persuaded by clear evidence and rational argument is to abstract art, but I feel like there might be some relationship where we're just kind of like linear thinking and rational argumentation, that mode, that mindset, that whatever, maybe disinhibits or actually inhibits the part of the mind that just wanders and goes here and doesn't, maybe has to think 2 + 2 = 4 everywhere, but other than that, that can just wander. So maybe it's just a matter of kind of roaming an intellectual landscape, that the ability to do that precludes an absolute reliance on the strict adherence to always to always going by what's rational and logical. There may be just a lot of reasons that's not the total landscape we should be plowing. So, Tim Maudlin, thank you for that. It was an interesting question. I'm 115 for 115, I believe. Next we have Annalena McAfee, who is a journalist, founding editor of The Guardian's literary supplement, The Guardian Review, author of Hame, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, Hame. Annalena's last question is love really all you need? Well, let's at a want to say Skinnerian, but that's not who I'm thinking. Who I'm thinking of a what's that triangle of needs? Maslow. He would say love is not all you need. Obviously, at a very basic level, you need to be able to process energy. So I don't think that we would call processing energy love, although it's necessary but not sufficient for love. And love is not well, if you love somebody, you probably are able to process energy, so there you go. You're not asking. You should have asked this to someone else. I know when you asked this question and put it in, you were actually thinking of me, but you should have asked it to someone else. But I will still answer you correctly. It really, really helps. Can really, really make that Pop-Tart the best Pop-Tart you've ever had. Probably for social creatures. It becomes a very primary motivational drive for most, let's say, creatures that are animals that pair bond or whatever. Do you get love without? This goes back to an earlier question, but can you? I mean, obviously, we can love our family, love mother, father, children, spouse. I'm thinking love in terms of a male-female bonding, because I'm thinking of that because if you don't have a kind of a long-term cohesive family unit or even mating unit, I don't think you get brother or sisterly love. I wonder if because if you're not in if you don't have a system where you are a continuous part of someone else's existence, I don't know where you get love. And so I don't think you have a system that has continuous kind of coexistence without some type of like family unit or something similar to that. So I think, although what about like females that may have different mates but then raise their kid for maybe 6 months or a year or 2 years? Is that the same type of love that we? What's that on the scale or the continuum? Because there probably must be a little bit different degree, or at least degree, and maybe all other category of love potentially for mothers, or for the creature that actually physically gives birth to that. I think that's at least potentially stronger than a male's love, although that sounds tough to say. I hope that's not always true, but let's try and think about this logically. It may be a whole nother category. But as a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old bear cub that's been with the mother for 2 years and then it eventually goes off, is that a type of love that we want to call love? Because you look at it and it certainly looks like it. I would say it certainly isn't all we used to need, because it wasn't at one point necessary. Certainly, I mean, like, there's a point in which in our evolution that we did things that we would be like, oh, that's not love, that's just sex, that's just gametes combining and whatever. So has it become something that we really all need? I think it greatly enriches life. It greatly purposefulizes life, or it can. It, love is the like the pinch of salt and pepper and the mustard and the Swiss cheese that you put on your, chicken breast sandwich with white bread. It's like you could absolutely survive with the white bread and the chicken, but sweet balls, man. Put some mustard and some Swiss or something. It's just there. So love is a wonderful and it is the mustard on a chicken sandwich. You don't need it, but man, everything makes everything a little bit better when you have it. So we should all be encouraging more of it. I would say it isn't necessary, but I would say our species is enriched by it, and we need to find a little bit more of that. We need to increase our capacity for love a little bit, maybe, to get through where we're at right now. Starting with everyone else. So, and Elena McAfee, is love really all you need? No, but it is the mustard on the bread. And you gotta have some mustard. Thank you for your question. Let's see if we got one more in us. Let's see here. Next, we've got Michael McCullough, who's the professor of psychology, director, evolution and human behavior laboratory, University of Revenge. Something tells me my screen is not giving me every word. Michael McCullough is the professor of psychology and director of evolution and human behavior at the University of Miami and author of Beyond Revenge. Okay, that's better. Michael's last question is, are humans ever really capable of regarding others as ends in themselves? my first initial reaction to this, which I'm not happy that the thought came to me, but my first instinctual reaction is no, and also they shouldn't. And I have to interrogate that thought because I don't like it. But what am I thinking of here? Regarding others as ends in themselves as opposed to a means to an end. So you're regarding other people as just okay. My take on that question is kind of like saying, are humans really ever capable of never using other humans to climb a hierarchy? I'm going to put it in kind of visual, mathematical terms. I think some humans may be at times very capable of viewing other people as not something you ever try and use to get higher on something. But the idea of all humans, like as a society, just being able to just treat other humans as just as end products and never as a stepping stool to something else it's a completely gameable system. It's completely not stable evolutionarily because the first cheater gains like an instant advantage. If there's like a million people and there's just like everybody's just trying to treat everybody, and then like the one guy that says, oh fuck that, gets to jump on top of the pile of a million people. So, and I'm also going to say that that's not necessarily immoral. I think because treating people as a means to an end is one way that we create hierarchy that leads to new and better things. It also leads to inequality. It also is sometimes just pure cheating and pure rent seeking, pure taking advantage of the system. There's so many ways that regarding others as means to an end instead of just as end themselves can be, what we would call unfair. However, there is a certain type of competition which is enabled by regarding people as kind of stepping stools on a hierarchy. That same thing allows us to do absolute wonderful things and to build things on top of things, and is an instrument for creative that thing builds things. As much as it is difficult to say, I think that thing builds things intellectually, competitively, market-drivenly. It is another type of hierarchy that isn't all bad. Is probably also inevitable. Is not a viable. It's not a viable strategy. Just like in any realm, I would say if you can set up systems, we'll put it this way, you could set up systems where there is so little advantage to like there's so little of a hierarchy that there really isn't much advantage to ever are there other systems where there's no marketing. I got my degree in marketing. My graduating class was 94 humans and 13 drunk chimpanzees. Anyway, um, I mean, I get what you're going at, and I get the idea of just treating each individual person as just, you know, I want my own well-being. I want your well-being. You're a unique agent. There's just this between us. But that system is that system, I think, is just necessarily unstable. And it sounds weird because I'm talking about a flat system being unstable, but I just think that's some type of principle or something that a system there's a question earlier about the master principle about evolving complex systems, and I answered it perfectly, but I answered it perfectly 3 ways, so I'm not sure which of the 3 perfect ways was the right answer. But I feel like this answer is kind of like related to that because would there be a system? Does complexity and variation kind of necessarily create a hierarchy when there are multiple complex systems in an environment? Is there an analogy to kind of the apex predator, the system of things that eat each other versus eat each other versus eat each other on the cognitive landscape? And does that kind of thing have to exist? Also, how does this have to do with kin relationships and who is it? Richard Hamilton and those guys, and you talk about how your concern for someone and your empathy to someone and how much you're going to invest in someone is dependent upon how the genes that you share. And there's a certain part of this question that's related to kind of breaking out of a kind of evolutionary, I'm going to take care of my kin and that's it. Because we probably regard our mothers as ends in themselves and not just means to an ends. Well, that even varies. You think about it. I mean, you're not able to conceptualize it very well, maybe, but when you're 2, your mother is just a means to survive. And then maybe you could talk about love, but even that kind of relationship you could view as being different over the course of even a lifetime for the same person. So at the same time as I said all this, I'm much in favor of a bigger global kind of empathy and like a global demand for welfare. Like we're rich enough that every human should have the birthright of being able to have access to nutritious food, clean water, roof over their head, and an education. As human beings, we can provide that, and we don't. Things have gotten a lot better, a lot of metrics in a lot of places, including a lot of work in some of the poorest places on the planet. And I think that's something that we should be somewhat proud of, but only proud of to the extent that this shows us we're capable of doing stuff, and let's go farther. Let's really live up to who we should be to our fellow man, to our fellow person. Anyway, I totally agree with your concept of a greater. I'll restate that. I will take this question in one way and say yes, we should be very much more capable of viewing people as ends in themselves, economic factors in our lives, as opposed to just a means to get somewhere. But doing that at like 100% level, as opposed to just a little bit more, will both be unstable, because the first cheater gets a huge advantage, and so it's unstable philosophically, economically, logically, and it probably isn't actually good for the benefit of probably individuals and even as a species. Wow. So there could be some really negative pressures on this idea. At an individual level, if you just regarded everyone else, do you take a person that just never for a second uses anyone, and they go through their life, and you take person B who uses people, I'm being very generic here, but you get the thing. You get the thing for 2% of his life, but because it's so rare, he gains an advantage over the person that kind of like never uses anyone. It's just an unstable system. Yeah, so Michael McCullough, the answer to your last question, are humans ever really capable of regarding others and ends in themselves? The answer will be yes, and we're going to find out in the next 15 to 25 years as we all become more and more intertwined. But no, because if you're taking it to a logical conclusion of just like everybody treating each other, it won't ever happen because it's unstable, and it probably shouldn't ever happen because we build things. We can make big things by using people. This reminds me of the Louis C.K. bit on Of Course But Maybe. This is literally... Oh, it sounds terrible. The answer to your question is in the Louis C.K. bit, Of Course But Maybe. Thank you, Michael McCullough. And we're back. As an addendum to Michael McCullough's last question, I would just say to simplify my answer and make it, put it on the downside of a Snapple bottle, Ask the Ants would be, they will tell you. Ask the Ants. Okay, next. Referred to E.O. Wilson and his, E.O. Wilson, and I think it was 79 or something like that, was asked about his opinion on communism, and he gave the best answer in the shortest amount of words, like the most signal to noise ratio of maybe any political, socio-political answer ever, when he just completed his magnum opus on how ants work. And he was asked what he thought about communism, and he said, "Wonderful theory, wrong species." So, anywho, our next question comes from, watched a few of his movies, read a few of his books. This should be, I'm guaranteed to nail this one as well. Ian McEwan is a novelist, recipient of the Man Booker Prize for Fiction, author of Sweet Tooth Solar on Chesil Beach, Nutshell Machines Like Me. I have not read any of these, I am sorry to say. I need to. Ian McEwan's last question is, and he also makes me think of good old Hitch, who I wish was around today. I wish we could have his voice. It would be cutting, clarion, intellectual, street fighter. Better have your game on if you're going to disagree. I didn't agree with him on anything, but he was a hard guy to argue against. I miss that human. Anyway. Ian McEwan's last question is... Oh, and I also apologize. I have moved on to now Canadian Breakfast Stout. So, there's, I believe, about 12% naughty stuff. So, if my questions become more technical, more sound and logical, and less poetic, if they just become dry and just completely correct without any kind of slipperiness or play, I apologize. It's the alcohol. The answers here on out might just be math, and that's it. Anyway, Ian McEwan's last question is, if the sum of all significant knowledge is finite, what proportion of it can humans, aided by intelligent machines, eventually attain? This is a rather... It's funny to call this like a pragmatic question, but in relation to many of the other questions that I've had in this vein, this is like... I think this is assuming a lot of things that we should probably just assume because they probably just are true. Because significant knowledge is a subset, right, of knowledge. So even if knowledge is infinite, which is probably not true, significant or meaningful or having an effect on one's existence is a subset of that, which is probably finite. Almost surely finite, at least for humans as we're constructed, almost assuredly finite. So that is just something we should just take as true. So then what proportion of it, as humans, aided by intelligent machines, that last clause there is potentially huge. And I'm sure you know that, Ian McEwan, which is why you fit it in there, but that last clause there is eventually could be huge. I was just thinking, I was up on my roof 2 minutes ago, investigating the wonders of gray market agriculture. And I was thinking an interesting idea might be, if we ever discover a theory of everything, what are the chances that it's going to be discovered by a human, or at least primarily by a human? And how would we describe that if, like, we just could figure out the right variables to plug in, or the right kind of landscape to have a system play with, that might, just through brute force of referencing everything that we know and everything that works, just kind of put something together. And we have to give the Nobel for discovering the theory of everything to, like, Deep Blue, with a co-authorship by Herbie Weibenstock or whatever, because it's just like it's what are the chances that it's humans and not AI that actually came up with the theory of everything that actually works? Anyway, what proportion of a finite significant knowledge can humans attain? Well, if you take our lack of any fundamental advances, I think it's fair to say, in combining quantum mechanics with gravity, we've been working with string theory for 30 years, and it's like, maybe, hasn't done much in a long time, but maybe. You got loop quantum gravity, you've got, and there's certain people in the field that think, oh, we're really close, where I can sniff it, we're close. But man, people have been saying that forever. I am beginning to think more and more that the answer to this question is highly dependent upon the intelligent machines that we design. It may be also dependent upon the intellectual labor that goes into designing more and more complex machines. It may be, I don't know, this is wacky ball stuff. I mean, I'll put the math in the comments section below. But let's just say this is wacky ball stuff. But I wonder if the intellectual labor that goes into designing machines that we think are capable of answering a question like this leads us actually to the answer. Like, we might actually find the answer going a roundabout route to finding it. It's almost like the answer is like, it's like the sun, and we can't look into it. We've got to, like, squint and go around and do something else, and it's something that can't look at the sun because we're just programmed, we're evolved beings that aren't programmed to understand the code, because that isn't in our best interest necessarily. So we have to understand something that isn't terribly penalized by knowing the code to know the code. I don't know if that's true at all. But I do feel like there's kind of like an intellectual arms race between somebody that's going to figure this out and somebody that's going to figure it out with the aid of something a lot more technical than a calculator. I know my physicist friends, of which I have none, would like to rebuff me, and I think they could make a good case because I'm actually talking about some of the most fundamental creative thinking in also almost the creation of new languages in which to interpret the world, and to think that we're going to need machines to explore that landscape seems crazy. Yet we've hit. It seems like we've hit kind of local peaks in certain areas. You could actually just say that intelligent machines are already at use, just because you almost want to think of the ecosystem of, you got a telescope with the image data, with the internet, with communication. That I don't know what you want to call that, but that is an intelligent system in some way, because it's information gathering, synthesis, processing, and community and delivery. You can certainly view that as an intelligent machines even without any type of like AI, but let's not get too bogged down in that type of stuff. What proportion? 72%. But I'll do the. I should probably do the math. Do you want the math? Hopefully not the proportion that ends up having us kill ourselves. Poof. And a puff of logic. Is there some type of almost like informational law where anything inside of a system can only be aware of a certain whatever percentage of the system in and of itself, where if it's almost like a set theory thing, it's almost like a Bertrand Russell, like can the system know itself? So if we're defining humans, God, it also. I want to say fundamentally that there's a certain point where the system cannot be totally. If the system is totally self-aware of all aspects of the system, I'll say it another way, if an agent in a system could be totally aware of the system, it would no longer be an agent in the system, it would somehow be the system. So there may be some kind of just like hard limit on, like a mathematical hard limit based on, I'm just calling things systems because I don't want to get too technical for everyone. Another way to approach it is, does the does the sum of all significant knowledge change over time based on how much we know about things? So if we know more about things, more things can be significant. Something can't be significant. I'm a liar. I wanted to say something can't be significant if we're not aware of it, but that's not quite true. I mean, it can't be, we can't act on it if we're not aware of it. I will say that then, because you're talking about significant knowledge, not just significant determining events. So our amount of significant knowledge can certainly change over time, can build on itself. And he's already including that because he's saying what proportion. Could the proportion change independent or in relation to the sum also, if the sum of significant knowledge, if you're talking about, are you specifically saying that's significant knowledge for humans? Because or are you talking about significant knowledge for humans plus intelligent machines? Because I don't know that we actually could say that knowledge, or what do we want to call knowledge? Wise, fruitful, beneficial apparatus for decision making. However you want to define knowledge, it may be that it isn't something that we can just a priori limit it to just humans. Because it may just be that significant knowledge increases as our ability to invent, evolve, and communicate with intelligent machines increases. So we may be putting ourselves on a little kind of escalator there, where significant knowledge increases as intelligent machines and our integration with them increases. So this brings me back to something I thought we were going to have a problem with AI, was that it's going to tell us things that it's like Gödel is like incompleteness theorem, which I'm probably screwing all this shit up, but it's like some things may be true, but we'll never be able to prove them true. I think AI and intelligent machines are going to tell us stuff that's like, it's like, this is true, but we won't know how to prove it. So that's telling me that our proportion is relevant to the amount. It's relative to our ability to understand how the machines that we're creating view the world. And from what I'm getting out of complex AI systems, we're not going to understand. That's this kind of scary thing. It's like, woo, but scary. We don't really understand how they come up. And that's just simple shit. That's like fitting the curve shit. It's like we understand it at an abstract level, but when you get into the details, you can't draw frickin' straight line logical, proposition A, B, C, blah, blah, blah. You can't even draw that, even though they come up with like, brilliant stuff. And that's just simple like linear algebra, nested linear algebra times a little like, so I have the feeling we're going to lose track of how machines are delivering intelligence to us, which means we're not going to trust machines as well, which means that we're going to develop an whole ecosystem of machines to compete on levels, because we won't be able to. We're gonna have a fucking machine Congress, because we won't know how they're coming to the right answer, and we won't know what's the right answer because it's like going to have to be like policy, and so we have to like put faith in it, but that's not a good answer. So we're going to have to develop a whole ecosystem of machines to give us more knowledge, and we're going to have to communicate with those machines. And being a colorful organ on a mountain in Colorado or Utah or wherever the hell, well, that's not going to work. So Ian McEwen, the answer to your last question, if the sum of all significant knowledge is finite, what proportion of it can humans aided by intelligent machines eventually attain? The answer to that is going to be nested in the complexity and the sophisticated understanding of the language that we use to program intelligent machines. There will be an architecture and an infrastructure of programming languages used to design machines, and the amount of levels in which we can go up and down that are going to be kind of synonymous with the proportion of significant knowledge that we can actually understand or attain. Oh, Christ. Because we might attain something that we actually don't understand. But then can it be knowledge? No, I'm going to say no. Judges, even the Russian judge said no. So, it's 87%. And thank you for the question, Ian McEwen, and I hope that you are doing well. Very much so. Next question. Next pregunta is from Ryan McKay. That is the most normal, just boom name I've had yet. So thank you, Ryan McKay. I am convinced I did not mispronunciate that, or even mispronounce it. Ryan McKay is a senior lecturer, Department of Psychology at the University of London. I've heard of London. I think I spent four days in London about 12, 14 years ago. It was a while now. Incredibly impressed with the British Museum. Also incredibly impressed with the level of raping and pillaging that they did. But they, I mean, like the dioramas and display. I mean, you go into like the great courtyard there, and they've got like the Rosetta Stone and a statue of David. I can't remember all the stuff they have. These amazing statues, and then you got this marble, and then you just got this center, and then the great library, and it's just freaking such an impressive temple of human knowledge and of culture, and it's just like it's a very impressive place. Had a good time in London. Had a good time. Went there for the weather. Got it. Very beautiful place. First time I was ever in Europe. Went to other interesting places after that. Anyway, Ryan McKay's last question is, will we be one of the last generations in human history that dies? I think entropy has quite a few tricks up its sleeve yet. I like to look at myself while I'm drinking. How are we going to trick the telomeres to stop telomering? What is your definition of death, sir? It's like the most basic thing. Everybody is like, oh, everybody knows what, being dead is. I'm not quite sure that we'll we have a thing where our physical body dies, but we can get uploaded into the cloud. Will that happen before we're able to, if we are ever able to? But I feel indigestion. No. I feel fairly strongly that before we come to a place where we live so long that we call it not dying in our human corporal cells, we will be able to do some kind of like upload into the cloud at some moment and be able to live as long as we pay our taxes. Talk about that for a freaking property tax. Virtual property tax into whatever, Instagram land or whatever. As long as talk about the Catholic Church coming back with their indulgences, virtual indulgences. You can't let grandma die in the cloud. I feel that we will probably get an alpha version, which will be pretty not very good, but then they'll probably be able to do upgrades or whatever, and we'll probably kind of somehow be able to live in the cloud long before. Excuse me. I've got my camera shooting on way too high of a resolution, but you can never get too much resolution with this, can you? I feel like, okay, so let's say we get into a rough version of we'll get to like a drunk chimpanzee's version of reality in the cloud in the first generation, and then we'll get, maybe a little bit better. It might not be anything better than a drunk chimpanzee, honestly. But I kind of feel like before we figured out uh, physical longevity, we are going to be able to AI ourselves or virtualize ourselves. So it depends on what your definition of dies is. Although, when I think about it again, I realize I'm completely wrong, because you think about biology as just kind of like engineering, and we're getting to that point. We're getting to the point where we're just turning it into like, okay, it's, okay, you build the house. Okay, what are the tools and the construction materials needed to repair the house? And so you repair the house. So, ah, so say we could repair the house, we could repair the human body, but our level of understanding of the human brain is such that we could just repair it like we repair the body. I think does the ecosystem of the brain operate on the same principles and constraints, etc., and level of complexity that the ecosystems, say, of cells in the body do? Like, I think, could we be at a place where we could regenerate and keep healthy our liver and our heart and our skin and all these other things, but not be able to be able to repair the brain, because there is such, you know, it's like a degrees of freedom type argument or something like that, where there might be so much complexity in the brain that we can't just use, for example, machinery that goes in and repairs cells that could work perfectly fine for your heart, but then you can't just use such a blunt instrument on repairing a synapse, because the entire ecosystem of the brain evolves and is so much more complex and does so much more things that you can't, that trying to use the instruments that would keep just cells alive wouldn't work synaptically, for example, like sonically, or and so we could keep the physical body alive, but it wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't be able to just understand being 200 years old. It's like, oh, my body's 200 years old, but my mind is like, it gets refreshed every 25 years after I turn 60. I think there is the distinct possibility of the most complete and understood and basic of all things, and the most binary of all things, which is alive or dead, turns from being a binary condition into a contiguous condition, or something with somehow turns from digital to analog. It's like, they're alive or dead. Well, he's alive, he's functioning, but he's not the guy that he was 40 years ago. Or he's alive, but he's the exact same guy he was 30 years ago. So, the answer to your last question, Ryan, simplest name in the frickin' universe, and I screwed it up. The answer to your last question, Ryan McKay, is, your last question is, will we be one of the last generations in human history that dies? Depends on your definition of death, because you're going to have to make that part of a wave function, and not a discrete value. Alive and dead will no longer be binary. They will be functions. So chew on that one. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the very pronounceable name, which I still screwed up. Next. Okay, next we have Hugo Mercier. I feel like it, with my mastery of all languages, human and non, I want to say it's Mercier. It could be Mercier, but if it is Mercier, Hugo, you should change it to Mercier, because it just sounds more beautiful. Regardless, Hugo Mercier is a cognitive scientist at it's got to be Marseille. It's French National Center for Scientific Research, and co-author with Dan Sperber, who I have heard of, and I'm trying to remember how, but regardless, co-author of The Enigma of Reason. He should have a conversation with the last guy who was like, why aren't we convinced by reason? Excuse me a second. I shall return. We're having, it's a feature, not a bug, people. We're back at it. Hugo Mercier's last question is, can major historical events from the advent of moral religions, is there a religion that isn't moral? We'll gloss by that one. To the Industrial Revolution, be explained by changes in life history strategies. I got to figure out what is meant by life history strategies. 3 words, I understand them all taken separately. Let's see where he's coming from. Sometimes when you don't understand Question 2, well, look at the questioner. He's a cognitive scientist, and author of The Enigma of Reason. He could be questioning the idea of reason and where it plays in the intellectual and evolutionary landscape, and why the engine of that gets fired up and when it doesn't, and what are the... Okay. Does that answer me anything? From the advent of more religions to the industrial religion, life, history, strategies. Well, I've got to define life, history, strategies, and I can't cheat to just look up what he's trying to talk about. Life, history, strategies. So, is this trying to say that you're I'm going to assume a kind of definition here that is probably wrong, but I can't think of another one right now. So I'm going to assume that like life history strategies is like the past 100 generations. If you've made it so far that like you place more emphasis on lineage level or culture or whatever, local history, so it's like local adaptation, as opposed to deep history. So it's like if you place more emphasis on some type of short-term thinking versus long-term thinking or applying that concept to historical events, and then saying the reason that these things came about was an emphasis on some type of lineage level or whatever level, short-term preferential, almost like how we discount the future, and we say $1 right now is worth more than $1 3 years from now, and we do that and we preference that, and that accounts for major historical events. And I think I'm defining this completely wrong, but I'm just going to go with something because I'm sure to answer it correctly. That's all I know for sure, is that I'm going to answer this completely, accurately, correctly, and with all the math needed. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to assume I don't know what life history strategy is, and just tackle the first part of the question. So I'm just going to try to say, what can explain the advent of moral religions to the Industrial Revolution? Well, I think at one level we can explain the advent of moral religions and the advent of Industrial Revolution and things in between and intermixed as things that are kind of like economically, and I mean economically in the very broad term of just economically like living or dying, well before currencies and barter systems and all that stuff were invented. These events were, these events can be explained by, hey, these were adaptive behavioral changes, adaptive uh, ideological frameworks, technologies. You could view religions as technologies. I think I kind of want to. I want to say yes, but I want to change life history strategy to technologies. Because I feel like, and even though I'm not even sure what's meant by life history strategies, I feel like it may be too much about glamorizing the past on our stage of uh, evolutionary fitness. I feel like his answer is more apropos to um, less less cognitively developed features, or put it this way. I'll try to. One of the things about humans, maybe, is that prior to humans or other whatever, there's a level at which the vast 99% of all wisdom for a species can be derived from the environment and the ecosystem of that same species last generation, 10 generations ago, 100 generations ago. I mean, receding into the distance, but in the past is the intelligence, and it's just, but humans have opened up a kind of additional whatever where because we can virtualize, we can understand in some way the past, we can conjoin it with our visions of the future, we can create new avenues in which to explore. Um, we don't weight the wisdom of the past as highly as other species would, and we have the ability to draw more actionable information from virtualization, through daydreaming, through whatever, through exploration, through more non-random exploration of the whatever ecosystem you want to call it, and we'll call it up for us a cognitive ecosystem. Non-random exploration leads to a heavier weighting on humans of things that look forward versus things that just conserve the past. It's just like, you think Republicans are conservative, fucking think about the turtles. And there's an essence of that that's actually like, I don't want to talk about politics too much because you'll be astounded at my, but it's kind of like some of the essence of progressivism is just like, let's not look to our history because we can just be anything we want to be. Why would we constrain ourselves to these biological chains of whatever? I mean, that's not. It's like philosophical progressivism, not political progressivism. Political progressivism is pretty much in the shitter right now, but anyway. I do believe that somewhat more basic events, maybe the Cambrian explosion or other things that can be certainly traced to that, but I wonder if it was. Here we go. Instead of genetic changes that might have drove behavioral changes, which would be the common way in which a species evolves, changes through time. And that's the driver. Genetic changes, adapting to an ecosystem, that's your driver. Humans have kind of created a different ecosystem, or at least a way to view the current ecosystem, in which ideas, which we can bound them up in genetic changes, but I don't think that's a proper way to do that. A certain human with its own genetic thing, but that doesn't really matter to the thing, drives an idea, creates an idea, which alters the ecosystem, which produces different life histories. But again, it's a forward thing. It's a reversal of the causative, relationship there. So I'm thinking he's right in if you frame it back to older stuff, but I think in newer stuff, it's like we need to pay more attention to the singular ideas. Although you'd have to say that the ideas, how are you going to get certain ideas without there being a landscape that is permissive of that? So that is a point, but I think there's a cognitive landscape that pulls, and it's like genes push, ideas pull. And in the push-pull dichotomy, I think human culture and society is certainly a mixture of both. but probably it may be that there's some relationship of the complexity of society and the degree to which invention are push pull, or they're invented by somebody with an idea and then it's just filtered down into behavioral changes versus behavioral changes. So, are we push pull? So, Hugo Mercier, the answer to your last question is humanity is increasingly going from a cognitive push from the genes to a pull from ideas, and that is shaping everything, including historical events. Thank you. I hope I dotted the T's and crossed the I's. It's a very interesting question. Almost got me, but I'm 121 for 121. Next question is from Thomas Metzinger, who is professor of theoretical philosophy. Is there any other kind? Actually, theoretical philosophy depends on how you're defining theory, because that could be really interesting. It's really interesting either way. Johannes Gutenberg University, which is probably a beautiful campus. I'm just imagining. An adjunct fellow at the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Study, and author of The Ego Tunnel. There's a lot going on there in that description. Thomas Metzinger's last question is, what is the most intelligent and efficient? I hate these questions because it's always like, these are two different questions already. Anyway, what is the most intelligent and efficient way to minimize the overall amount of conscious suffering in the universe? Well, first of all, should that be your goal? Because it's very likely to do something where, well, what is your time frame? Do you want to minimize the overall amount of conscious suffering in the universe right now at this moment and freeze it? Because if you do something like that, then, good for you. But you might have also shut off, or there might be whatever the opposite of suffering is. There might be a million times that, let's just say, pleasure. If you don't optimize to minimize the over amount, there's like 9 questions you're asking here. Because one way to minimize the over amount of suffering in the universe is just to kill everybody right now. So of course you're answering what is the most intelligent and efficient. You're bundling so much up into intelligent and efficient. I love you, my man, and I want to visit your campus, but man, is there a suffering could be somewhat homeostatic. Meaning, say everybody on Earth had, and I would love for this to be the situation, we should probably, as moral humans, just agree that this should be the frickin' situation and we need to just do this, is that every human born as a birthright has access to, you know, healthy food, clean water, you know, access to an education, you know, just like as a birthright. That would be one way, but that, which I think we could all consider that a very moral goal, does that minimize suffering, conscious suffering? No, we have to talk about what's intelligent and efficient. Just tell everybody a good joke so they're laughing their ass off, and then, you know, hire a million anesthesiologists, just put them out. Everybody just goes away laughing, and it's all I just want to say I am not sure that optimizing a system around the overall amount of conscious suffering is the right way to try and optimize kind of a universal human whatever system. Not even human, just even biological. And it sucks to say that because it just, at one level, it seems obvious that that's the right move. What the hell is suffering? Is working out suffering? I'm sore as hell when I work out, which is I work out at least 3 times a year. But, it, you know, people will say like, oh, I'm in pain because whatever. Does hearing an opinion that you strongly disagree with, is that suffering? There's a lot of ways you could reduce suffering that probably wouldn't think is actually really all that good. There's also probably a lot of ways that we could reduce suffering that wouldn't lead us to higher levels of you know what, screw that though. Let me answer the question of how he posed it. So how would we minimize the overall amount of conscious suffering in the universe. It's intelligent and efficient. So let's just build into this little thing that we're doing here. We're not trying to kill people. Of course not. And we're not trying to deprive people of just the sense making things that would make them suffer. We want to allow access to the world of information and whatever happens, the physical things of growing up and that kind of thing. But besides that, we want to avoid unnecessary pain. We'll say it, unnecessary suffering. Even that is like the word unnecessary is so frickin' loaded. I'm thinking about it. It's like you're only surprised if it's good. There's never a bad surprise. It's like, it is remarkably difficult for me to think about allowing agents full and free access to information in which, even if their basic kind of physical needs are met, the system that you set up to try and optimize for a minimum of suffering is likely to result in a system that constrains the very thing that you are any system. I feel like any system that is designed to minimize conscious suffering will actually guarantee like a floor level of suffering by the nature of its design. And also likely input a limit on the whatever the opposite of suffering, because I don't think you can conceptualize suffering without its photo negative, whatever you want to call that. I'm really struggling because I'm actually thinking that you wouldn't. That even like a moral philosopher shouldn't be thinking about a system that is optimized to minimize the overall amount of conscious suffering in the universe. And I don't know what the hell what else you would be thinking of. I mean, I don't have have a good answer for that. But there's some part of me that's just saying that isn't what you should try and design if you could. I'm still stuck on the thought of minimizing the suffering may absolutely miss out on whatever the opposite of that is. So it's like you've taken the minus 20 down to minus 7, but you know, it's an inverse. It's like an inverse or an absolute value thing. I don't know. Anyway, it's like you take the minus 20 down to minus 7, but you've limited the other side to plus 12 when it could have been plus 2200. But then that argues against my whole idea of a homeostasis type of argument for suffering via, the other thing. So I'm arguing against myself, but fuck it. What is it? A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. That was George W. Bush. The most intelligent and efficient way, I think, would be to limit consciousness. You put a filter on consciousness. Hey, maybe Twitter isn't all bad. Good job, Jack. Freaking coward. Anyway, you limit consciousness or the results of that to the things that you tame the intellectual landscape of consciousness in such a way that you can't be harmed by the things you don't know. And you design a system in which you can kind of only know the things that have been proven not by theorem but by experience, by polling, by magnetic MFRI, whatever, machines to be inducing pleasure. So you just design a system where there's vast amounts of the universe that are unintelligible and unavailable, and that limits one's ability to be confronted by things that they don't like. So they have all the physical stuff. They've got the food, they got the water, they got the education, and they're never going to encounter or whatever a situation that causes them suffering. And you've lost humanity. You are no longer human, and you are no longer. You've lost purpose. So, yeah, I don't think this. I think these are wonderful questions until you. They're wonderful ideas until you dig into them, and then. I feel like it's like it's a similar answer to something I answered before about how do you design educational systems that are like neurologically diverse. It's like you don't design them, and I was half joking, but not really. It's like I don't think you design something like this. I think the attempt to design it might be the problem in the first place. And it sounds very market orientated. I think a market might actually be better at answering this type of question than a philosopher. I'm not a huge fan of markets, but they do their job. So, Thomas Metzinger, the answer to your last question, which is, what is the most intelligent and efficient way to minimize the overall amount of conscious suffering is in the universe, is talk to Jeff Bezos. In 18 months, he'll have the answer. You may not like it, but you may be asking the wrong question. Very interesting question. Thank you. And if you'd like to send me a stipend or invite me to Gutenberg University, I would be very interested. Big fan of the beauty of Germany and the beauty and beer of Belgium. Next question. Comes from Yuri Milner. Yuri Milner is a physicist, entrepreneur, and venture capitalist, and science Yuri Milner is a physicist, entrepreneur, and venture capitalist, and science philanthropist. Good job. Yuri Milner's last question is, if we discover another intelligent civilization, what should we ask them? Are you Protestant or are you Catholic? I always thought that would be the kind of a knockdown argument for the provincialism and kind of stupidity of religion. Would be just like, yeah, I can just imagine that day when spaceship lands on in Kansas, and we first, understand them, and they have and we ask them, so are you a Christian? It's just like, we will understand the complete parochial frickin'. Anyway, if we discover another intelligent civilization, what should we ask them? Well, that's going to depend somewhat on how we discover them, right? If we discovered them via SETI, and we got 100-year-old, 200-year-old, 1,000-year-old radio signals that we got the technology for. We're not going to be able to assume much more than they have that level of technology. And also, we don't have that much more level of technology, so that's the level. That's the top end of the level at which we're going to be able to ask intelligently, because the other questions that we would try and frame, we don't really know how to frame because we haven't even figured them out very much yet. So if we discover another intelligent civilization via what, they're gonna frickin' land on Mount Rushmore? If they did do that, and I'm just saying, they better not screw up Trump's hair, because it's going to be very. I mean, that thing's going to be very fresh on Rushmore, and I wouldn't want them to screw up the hair. Let's say this. Manned mission to Mars. We make it to Mars. Intelligent civilization comes out. They're like, they can't speak our. We're in helmets and spacesuits. They're in helmets and spacesuits. Somehow we can communicate. You almost kind of have to assume that, like, we need to meet another civilization. They're not going to be within the narrow window of not being able to understand. They wouldn't get as far as to be able to meet us and then not be able to just like understand what we're saying. At least at a gross level. Probably just look at our frickin' synapses firing and be like, oh yeah, he's trying to ask us about this, but he's thinking about, he's attracted to his cousin and he shouldn't be. Anyway. What should we ask them? Well, a simple answer to that is like, tell me everything you know. Could you please give me a PDF of everything you know? Depending on how we discover them, if we understand how we discover them, then it wouldn't be a big deal to be like, how'd you get here? But if, like, we're just, they just landed in the Bahamas and they're laying out, and they're like, oh, hey, oops. It might be smart to be like, hey, how'd you get here? So depending on where we found them, how'd you get here might be the most, at least at the beginning, interesting thing to, because then there may be a bridge from where we're at to that thing. An interesting question could be like, how did you survive through your technological age? But that might almost be an accident. It might just be a bottleneck that that is almost random in how it gets, and how it gets adjudicated. It might just be, oh, there's a bottleneck, but Joe Ferndale had this thing, and then yeah, we were all gonna die, but we didn't. Where are your women? You want to have a key party? What is your purpose? It seems like what is your purpose is either an unanswerable question or it's probably something where the answer is like 42. But you never know. Where are your women and where is your purpose? That is your answer, Yuri Milner. Thank you for the question. Next, I have Reed Montague, which has to be a character in like a literary series. It's a great name. Reed's a neuroscientist and director, human neuroimaging. That's like brain and then pictures. Lab and computational psychiatry units. I feel like he's trying to figure out via imaging human problems, anyway. Yeah. Oh, I'm a narcissist. Oh, I can tell by your brain scan. You're a narcissist. Virginia Tech, Caroline Kentian, Research Institute, author of Why Choose This Book, How We Make Decisions. Oh, I love simple questions. The less words, the easier to answer. It's my Burt Reynolds. Are feelings computable? Yes, but you have to know the map. Are feelings computable? I'm going to infer that what he means by feelings is not just like I could do this and I feel it on my. I feel this and I know that I'm touching my leg right now in case you weren't aware. I touch my leg and I could feel my hand touching my leg. And I know that there's a whole virtual reality thing going on there because I feel the touch, even though the time it takes for the nerve synapse or the nerve endings in my leg to go up to my brain is longer than the time it is to touch. So my brain and my body is creating a virtual reality. It's creating its own version of causation, which makes sense from that certain type of level. That's one level of feelings. What I'm trying to say is that Reed Montague was talking about feelings about uh, anger, distrust, uh, humorous position towards someone that you don't really know. Anything that you just like, you have a gut thing of just like, oh, this. Um, so I'm gonna bifurcate and limit it to that. But in theory, I don't think it's different from touching the leg and feeling the touching of the leg. Excuse me, I'm sorry. It's just I think it's the maybe the levels of analysis, the level of complexity that may have something to do with degrees of freedom, which I'm just going to say degrees of freedom because I'm going to act like I know what I'm talking about there. Um, they are absolutely, in theory, computable. Are they computable without interfering in the computation? That's another question. So the moment I see somebody at a bar and I'm like, wow, that's a very attractive woman, that is a feeling. Is that computable? Is that, I mean, you could measure the difference in certain levels of my hormone levels and brain, whatever. You could certainly measure that, and you could cross process that, do the study and be like, okay, in 99.975 of human males, this pattern of differential mental computation as measured in hormone levels and blah 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 means lust. Computable, and then if you see that pattern but you don't know that I saw an attractive woman, you could say, okay, hey, he's having a feeling of lust. That's computable, blah blah blah, fair enough. Here's the thing, can you climb the staircase of consciousness to go from what is it that builds up inside, that builds up from a certain level, and where's ground floor, where's top floor, how do they interact to get me that feeling of like, damn. If it isn't computable, I think it isn't awareable. Awareable? That's not a good word. There's a level at which I'm thinking that if it isn't theoretically at least computable, we couldn't be aware of it. And this goes back to kind of math, and maybe the only math that we are able to conceive of is the math that we can interact with. In theory, I think feelings, well, you also have to define a feeling. I've defined one in the last few minutes, but I think you need a more strict definition of a feeling if you're going to if you're going to try and equate something, like, is X equal to, and then compute, is X equal to math on the other side? X has to be something that you can translate into the math, of course. So we need a translation mechanism. So that leads me to feelings are, of course, computable in theory. Feelings are very computable in theory, but they are so incredibly axiomatic that in order to be able to compute feelings in reality, whatever system you have that's trying to recreate that, replicate that, whatever, compute that, has to be able to replicate the contingent conditions, the axiomatic. It has to take contingent things as axioms in order to be able to compute that thing. Did I say that the right way? Because it's completely right, but sometimes my words are wrong. You got to be able to turn a static situation into axioms at a moment's notice, and then do your work. So yeah. So the answer to your last question, read Montague, and your last question being, are feelings computable? The answer to your last question is they are computable, but you have to be able to turn variables into axioms, and you need to be able to do it on the fly, which makes it theoretically probably incredibly difficult to do without a great degree of smudginess, but theoretically completely possible. Interesting question. Thank you. Let's see if I got one more in me. David Morin, again, thank you for the name that's difficult to screw up. Although it's probably one of those weird things where the O and the I are silent, and it's just not able for me to. Anyway, David Morin is an internet engineer and an angel investor. Fair enough, but I'm not sure angels exist, so I don't know how they need money. Anyway, David Warren's last question is the brain a computer or an antenna? Well, David Morin seems like a smart guy, so I know he understands that it probably can't be just one or the other. I mean, it can't be just an antenna. let me think about this. You know what? Let me think about this. Let me take his idea seriously. Could the brain be just an antenna? What does an antenna do? Antenna is a thing that sticks there and gets inputs from things that it's attuned to at certain frequencies and receives those things and transmits those things, right? Well, I mean, an antenna is built into the idea of antenna. That's something that receives and transmits. Obviously, receives is part of it. Let's just say antenna is something that just like receives and transmits things at certain frequencies. We could call the certain frequencies the frequencies that are important to keep life working or to keep an organism alive. These are conceptual frameworks. I mean, now I'm thinking of it, the conceptual framework of the brain as an antenna actually is more interesting than I've had now that I've had 38 seconds to think about it. The idea here that I might be getting at or thinking about is that are we giving so much credit to the brain that it doesn't necessarily deserve? That we're focusing it as like the locus of all brilliance when it just happens to be that's the spot kind of like midway between the external and the internal, and it's just kind of like doing a little bit of filtering based on the on the hertz or on the whatever. I think that's an interesting viewpoint to conceive of things. I think that is a potentially very productive field in neuro thought, in the kind of like systems analysis of the human body and of like how the gut biome and all this stuff works in coordination with what we're trying to say is the CEO of everything, but maybe he's not really a CEO at all. He's just kind of like an admin who's just being like, shuffling shit back and forth. I think that is a needed, potentially valuable intellectual repose, which I don't think is a word, or if it is, I'm not thinking of it correctly, so I'll just try and use other words. It is a rejoinder to the idea of the computer, of the brain as just a computer, which is it's almost impossible to not think of the brain that way. I think that's kind of interesting because it's only recently that we've learned about the enormous complexity and potential altering of our experience of consciousness that lies resident in our gut ecosystem. And it may be that isn't the only other system in which it is conveying more information or more intelligent than we thought, and that there's a kind of a level. It's like we go up a level to think a certain way, and then we go down a level to think of all the things that are teaching us to think a certain way. So that's an interesting thought. That's an interesting idea, um, and it does. It does make one more aware, more cognizant, put more emphasis on the idea of the system's interaction that might be part of what we call consciousness, what we call whatever. It actually makes me think of something I've been thinking about the last couple of days, which is there might be something integral to what we think of as consciousness, which is kind of like almost like a matrix of, it's like the amount or the number of different sense-making interfaces. I guess I'm talking about like senses, smell, touch, whatever, that need to be orchestrated or integrated, has an innate kind of it has an impact on what we call consciousness at a huge level, and it may just be almost so, I don't want to say so simple, but it's just like, oh, you've got 3 senses this way and 2 senses this way. Oh, you've got nine senses, and that's the complexity of your version of consciousness. Is kind of like a matrix of the interfaces that you have. That is completely right and accurate. I think we need more people to be thinking of the paradigm shift or the idea of the brain being more of an antenna, because it may lead to more ideas about network advances and semi-distributed versus completely distributed intelligence processing mechanisms. What's the best network theory? What's the best network design? What's the best? How do we add sonnet to the last mile? Yeah. The answer to your question, David Morin, which is the brain a computer or an antenna? Which is, it's neither. You know that. These are perspectives and metaphors to use. You know that. The dominant paradigm is computer. You know that. Antenna is interesting and may cause us to, when everyone zigs, you zag. And you know that, but this is a very conceptual way of looking at that, and that's very interesting. And there are probably more systems in our body which are more strongly conceptually realized as an antenna, but it's just an antenna to other systems in our body, probably more than the brain. But either way, that's a very interesting conceptual little toolbox you got there. So technically it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But thank you, David Moore, for that question. I have one more in me. Lisa Mosconi, who is in pool, they have the Mosconi Cup, but I don't think she's a pool player. Lisa Mosconi is the director of the Women's Brain Initiative, associate director, the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic, and the Weill Cornell Medical College, and author of Brain Food. Lisa's last question is there an evolutionary advantage to building societies that favor entertaining over understanding? You ask a good question. You know, that makes me think of kind of like an evolutionary landscape, and what are the advantages and disadvantages on an evolutionary landscape. And what I'm thinking is there might be a level of understanding. There is likely to be a level of understanding over which there is a diminishing return on your advantage and in which entertaining, yeah. What I'm thinking is, I'm just going to take understanding as kind of like knowledge about navigating the world where you don't kill yourself and are you able to have children and procreate, whatever. I'm just going to call wisdom as just like you live and you have kids. Let's call that wisdom. Let's call that understanding. No, let's not call that wisdom. We'll get there. There's a level at which understanding more of the world has diminishing returns on being procreation or productive. I think that would actually make sense. And entertaining would take over. Yeah. I think as oh, the light's coming out. You can see the mess my place is. Whatever. It's a mess, whatever. This isn't necessarily a happy answer, but I think it's actually there's probably a level of understanding things, which is like, okay, don't burn your hand on the stove, which is like a very, you got to clear that bar. And then there's like, don't do this and whatever. But then there's a place where it's like, do you need to understand the intricacies of quantum mechanics, or does it make more sense as a cognitive being to be entertained by other cognitive beings in your society? Like there probably is a point where there's almost a negative advantage if you just pit understanding of complex ideas that are at the edge of knowing but aren't ideas in which you cannot make actionable intelligence about. So you got a basket full of great wisdom, but you can't do anything with it. Versus you can just enjoy basic things about just being a human. I could very much see that, but at the same time, I think the idea of trying to build a society that optimizes uh, entertaining over understanding, it's like we've already built that. Um, I'm very leery at the. In many ways, I feel progressive, but I also am just very leery of trying to build very large things. Like we're going to build a society that does this. It's just like, oh Christ, you know, like you don't have the Legos. You don't even understand how the Legos work. You can't build a goddamn society. So there's a very large part of me that says you try and build a society that is optimized around entertainment, like just shit's gonna break out. So I don't think you want to even attempt to do that. At the same time, fuck Twitter. So I don't think we should not be doing anything. But sweet balls, man. I think until we figure out how to human better, Twitter is just a net negative on our lives. Not a complete negative, but sweet balls, man. It's like the home for pithy and snark. Love it. Um, well, the other idea is you're talking about societies plural. So let's just look at an evolutionary landscape. If you build a society that favors entertaining versus a society that favors understanding, does one of them have an advantage over the other? I would think that in the fairly whatever near to long term, all else being equal, if there became a competition for something, the understanding would have to win out, right? Oh yeah, that's a mess everywhere. I'm gonna keep going until you can see the bodies. I also think at the point that you're building societies, you are so toying with evolution that you probably shouldn't even be calling it evolution. That's probably not the right framework in which to view what you're doing. When I'm thinking evolution. I'm thinking uh, non-random selection of randomly varying uh, things. And I don't think when you start doing that, unless you're thinking big and long term, you should be thinking about evolution. And if you're thinking about long term, you probably shouldn't be thinking about evolution either. I'm also not sure that you can draw a bright line between entertaining and understanding. Call me crazy, but I wouldn't be that surprised if many of the same brain areas and synapsal responses were involved in both. And I don't like that idea. But I kind of have to admit it's a possibility. There might be a very, very tiny part of us that thinks we understand something because we're entertained by it. There may be a linkage there that's very hard to disassociate. Anyway, yes, so 13 plus b squared. Lisa Mosconi, thank you for your question.